Hey everyone, Chrissy at Pinnovate. This tutorial is for our weaving kit and I am so excited about this. It is perfect for anyone that is very hands-on or loves textiles, which I completely do. So we're going to learn a few different stitches and techniques and we're going to create something super awesome together. And I cannot wait to see how they turn out. Okay, so your kit is full of so many goodies. Let's go through them together. So we have your loom. This is your shed stick. You're going to have 2 yarn shuttles, a wooden dowel so you can hang your weaving on at the end, a darning needle, a comb, as well as a selection of yarn. So make sure you have all of your supplies together and we'll get started. For the very first step of our weaving, we have to set up our loom. So using the thinnest yarn that you have, we have to set up our warp. So the warp of the loom are the pieces of yarn that go up and down that you actually weave through. So we have to set that up first. So by doing that, we are going to create a little loop and loop it over one end, the farthest end on one of the sides of our loom here. In and out, and then I'm just going to tie a double knot so it is nice and secure. So now that it is secure on the one side, I'm just going to go up and down, filling in the warp all the way back and forth, making sure I don't miss any spots, and I'm putting it in every single section. Once you get to the end of your warp, we're going to trim off your yarn. So just cutting with some scissors. And again, we're going to tie a double knot around this section here, this very bottom corner. So I'm just going to wrap it through. And knot it off just to make sure that it's secure. And your 2 knots should be in opposite corners. So one up here and one down here. Now that your warp is ready, we are going to start weaving. Another quick note is your warp on your loom should have consistent tension all the way through. It should be nice and even, not too loose in any sections. We want to make sure that it's going to hold our weaving together. Okay, so the warp on our loom is prepared. Now I have to prepare the weaving yarn. So using one of our shuttles, I'm actually just going to take a bit of yarn and wrap it all the way around a few times to prepare for weaving. And then once I'm happy with a good amount on there, I'm just going to trim it off. Now this shuttle is ready to go. Our very first stitch is called the tabby stitch. Now this is very simple. This is where you go over one warp and under the next. It's an up and down motion all the way through. So again, our warp is set up. Now the shuttle that we have with our yarn on it, the weaving portion that we're doing, the technical term is actually called weft. So our weaving or our weft is what's going up and down over our warps. Okay, so I'm going to have a bit of a tail and I'm basically just going under, over, under, over, under, over, the whole way along. And then I can pull that whole shuttle all the way through. So I want to make sure that I have a nice tail, and I can always tie that in later. Now going back the other way, you're doing the same stitch, but you're going the opposite. So instead of going under the same warp, I'm gonna go over and under. So it's like you're laying a brick pattern. So once you've woven all the way over to the other side, we want to make sure that this stays loose on the ends. If you pull it too tight, it's going to start changing the shape of the warp of your loom, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure that it is a bit loose on our ends, so we do not change the shape. Once you have it there, you're going to take your comb and just give it a little scooch down so that they are touching each other. And it looks like a brick pattern. So there you have done the tabby stitch. And with this, you can keep continuing on until you have covered as much as you want. You can also go only a portion of the way and kind of start creating shapes that way. So in my sample here, I have done a tabby stitch in blue as well as in white, but I have done it at an angle. So here I started all the way and then I started going shorter, shorter, shorter. So this stitch, even though it's very simple, you can do a lot with it. If you are struggling getting your shuttle back and forth through the warp of the loom, what you can do is you can actually put in your shed stick. So I have just woven this through, and this actually allows the warp to sit higher as well as lower. So when I am going back the other way now, I can actually just slide this all the way through because it provides a nice big gap in between the top and bottom. So again, once I have it all the way to the edge, I'm not going to pull it tight. I just want to leave that loose on the edges and then comb this down all the way. So again, if you prefer using the shed stick to create that space in between, feel free to do that. Okay, so once you are done your tabby stitch, you can go as far up or as little as you like. Once you're finished, you're just going to leave a tail. So I like to leave an extra long tail. It's always better more than too short. So I'm gonna weave this into the back at the end. The next weaving stitch that you're going to learn is called Sumac. Now you can use this with any of your yarns, and it creates somewhat of a braid. So it has diagonal loops along here. I've done it at the top, as well as right here in the light blue, and right in here with the dark blue. So again, you can use this with any of your yarns. It just depends on the texture or the look that you want on your weaving. So for our sumac stitch, I'm actually going to use our thickest wool. So this wool, it's so soft and fluffy. This is called roving. So this is before they spin it into yarn. And it's beautiful to work with. It adds such a lovely texture to your weaving. So for this, I'm going to take off a chunk. So let's say about there, and I'm going to cut this first. Okay, so we are creating basically a braid. So with my wool, we have to be careful with this because it does tend to pull apart and get a little bit fluffy on us. So we do kind of have to look after this. So we are going to go over 3 of our warps, and then we're going to loop around that 3rd warp. So I went over and now I'm bringing it back underneath. Okay, and I'm going to pull, so it's almost right at the end. So again, I'm leaving a tail to weave in after. Okay, so I went over and I looped around the 3rd. Okay, so now I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3 and loop around the 5th. And it's going to create a diagonal line going this way. Okay, so now I'm going over 5, 6, 7. I'm looping over number 7 and back underneath. Again, there's another diagonal line. So it's 7, 8, 9. So it's every odd number. I'm going to go over number 9, loop underneath, and bring it back. And you can see this diagonal happening. Okay, so over the next 3 and bring it under. Over the next 3 and bring it back under. And you're going to do this all the way to the end. Okay, so I have this awesome looking diagonal section. It's nice and puffy. There's lots of texture to this. So again, think about your tension. So we want this to be loose on our warp, so it's not pulling in on the sides. And when you're happy and you're ready with this, you're going to take your comb and you're just going to push it down so that there's the same amount of tension between each of your wefts, heading back and forth, all of the weaving. So to create a braid with your sumac stitch, you're gonna go back the other direction, doing pretty much exactly the same thing. So on the end, I'm actually just gonna loop it around that last one to finish that side off. Okay, so now this is where I'm gonna start from. So I'm gonna go over 3, so 1, 2, 3, over 3. And now when I wrap it, I'm actually gonna wrap it back around, but at the top rather than underneath. And it's going to create the diagonal in the other direction. So again, I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3. I'm counting the one that I've already wrapped around because I'm still going over it again. Pull, wrap around to the top. Now that diagonal is going back the opposite direction, and that's going to create a braid. Okay, so I'm actually gonna show you a trick here. So this worked out well. I don't have enough yarn. I cut mine too short to go all the way to the end. That's okay, don't worry about it. If that happens to you, that's not a problem. What we're gonna do is I'm just gonna tuck this to the back. I'm gonna weave that in later. So now I have kind of an asymmetrical shape here, which is really cool because this is gonna add more dimension to your weaving. So I'm gonna go in here afterwards and add some more stitches on this side and kind of build it up and kind of create a really cool asymmetrical weaving. So if you run out of yarn, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. So again, we want to make sure that we have the same tension all the way across, the same tension in our warp as well as our weft. We're not pulling too tight anywhere. Otherwise, that's going to cause us problems later on. Okay, so I'm gonna go back in here really quick and kind of even this out. I'm gonna go back in and do a quick layer of tabby. So the same stitch that we learned before, just to fill in this uneven area. Okay, so I've added some tabby stitch on this side where I ran out of my roving, and I've evened that section out. And again, I just use my comb, make sure everything is nice and secure, and then we will move on to our next stitch. So when it's in a small area like this, I was just using my hands to weave it back and forth. I find that the shuttle is a little bit trickier in smaller areas. So if you find that you prefer just using your fingers, please go right ahead. So our next stitch is called looped tabby. I've also seen it called pile as well. Now, like in the name tabby, you're basically just weaving through the warp as before, but what it turns out is all the loops, this is here. You're going to have some more definition and texture. This is looped tabby here, as well as our roving wool as well. So it adds some really nice definition and texture into your weaving. So for our looped tabby, I have loaded up one of my shuttles, and I am just going to go again back and forth all the way through. Remember to do the opposite of the stitch that you already have below. If you want to use your shed stick, feel free. If you prefer that, it keeps that opening between the top and the bottom warp for you, absolutely. And we're just going to start off with a normal tabby. Okay, so I have my tabby stitch going across. I'm leaving a nice long tail to weave in afterwards. Now, the loop part, so this is where we're actually going to be pulling these tabby stitches out from our warp on our loom. So I like to just use my fingers and kind of pull them up like this. But I've seen it as well where you can actually loop each one around a dowel or a long straight stick. We basically just want to make sure that these tabby loops are coming off of our loom here. They're all starting to stick up, creating some 3D and dimension to our weaving. Okay, so I want all of my loops to be roughly the same size. Okay, when I'm happy with that, I'm just going to take my comb and push them down nice and gently, remembering to have the same amount of tension throughout. Okay, so now I have one row of looped tabby. So I'm going to go back the other way and create a second row. Again, making sure not to pull on this too tight so it affects my warp. And I'm just going to loop all of these tabby stitches as well, by just pulling up on them, making sure they're all roughly the same height off of our loom. All right, so I have all these cutie little curly cues on here. I'm just gonna press this down, use my comb. There, and so this is our looped tabby. I like to go in with just a straight tabby stitch a couple rows afterwards to hold this in place. Because it is a little bit loose, I wanna make sure that it is secure. Okay, so I'm just going to use my thin black yarn to create a couple tabby stitches to hold this last one in place. And again, I cut my yarn with a long tail to weave in afterwards. There, now that last tabby stitch is going to help hold these loops in place. So the last stitch I'm going to show you is called a raya knot. So that is these nice dangly pieces right at the bottom here, but you can have this anywhere within your weaving. Okay, so I'm going to use my dark blue yarn for this. I haven't used this yet, so I want to incorporate it. And I think that this is going to be the bottom of my weaving and this is going to be the top. So I'm actually going to have them dangling down over a little bit of my weaving. But again, you can have them off of the bottom. You can incorporate this anywhere. So I know that I just want little ones because they're going to be dangling over top of my weaving. If you have them at the bottom, you can make them nice and long as well. So I just want little ones. Now, if that's the length I want them, I'm going to fold it in half and do a double. So it's the same on both sides. And then I'm going to cut that. Okay, so now with this piece, you're going to cut as many as you need to get across. Okay, so to make our raya knot, you're going to find 2 of your warps and place this on top, right in the middle. Now these ends are going to tuck right into the center together, and then you're going to pull them down, and these are going to just kind of dangle all the way along. So again, once this one is done, I'm going to take the next 2 on my warp and lay it across the top. And both of these are going to hug that warp into the center, have their little tails come out together, and you're going to pull down. So I finished my raya knots and they got a little bit hairy and crazy and they're covering up a little bit too much. So I'm gonna go in and just give them a quick little haircut here. There we go. Just being very, very careful not to cut any other of my loops or stitches or yarn in there at all. So again, your raya knots can go anywhere you like. If you just want to have one small section, a little square of raya knots hanging here, and you can do other stitches in the other area, that's completely fine. You can have it coming up in a triangle. You can have it dangling down from the bottom. It's completely up to you, but that stitch works anywhere on your loom. So those are essentially the 4 stitches that you need to know. I am going to do a few rows of tabby really quick and I will show you how to finish it off. Okay, so I have finished my weaving so far. Now to finish it off, I just want to incorporate these tails on the end and weave them into the back of our loom here. So I'm going to just flip this over. And I'd like to do this before I take it off of the loom while it's still stretched. So I'm just going to take one of these ends, put it into my darning needle. So I find if you actually bend the yarn over the needle, make it nice and tight, and then that'll fit through without kind of fraying the ends. Okay, so now I'm just going to weave this into the back for all of the sides. So I have all of my tails woven into the back of my piece here. So once they are secure, I'm just gonna start trimming a little bit. I'm gonna still leave a little bit of a tail, but I wanna get most of the bulk off of here. So I'm just trimming off the ends of my tails. Okay, so the back of my weaving is all set and my front is good to go. So you have a couple different options when you are taking your weaving off of your loom. So the first one I'm going to show you is probably the easiest, and then I'll show you a second option as well. Also, you don't necessarily have to put this onto a dowel. You could use a piece of copper, you could use a piece of driftwood, whatever you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dowel. Okay, so I'm actually going to just loosen up this portion of my loom so that this rotates. Okay, this is going to be a little bit easier for me to get all of these warp loops off. Okay, and I'm going to go one by one. So I'm going to take this loop off first, and I'm going to cut the end. And then with that, I'm going to take one on either side of my dowel and tie it directly on. Moving on to the next one. For this last one, I'm just going to loop it around and create a knot on its own little loop here. So I'm just sliding it through and up to the top. So now that is all attached on our dowel. So to release it off the bottom, I'm actually just going to pick it up and pull it right off. Okay, so I've pulled my weaving off of my loom and I'm left with these little itty bitty bits at the bottom. So I basically just want to do the exact same thing and trim them and tie them up to my last part of my weaving here. Okay, so I have secured my weaving onto my dowel and I have tied off the bottom as well. So I am left with all of these crazy little tassels on here that I don't want. I want my weaving to be nice and finished. So I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with the tails on my weaving here, and I'm just going to put these all into the back. So with the darning needle, we're just going to do a little bit of sewing now. All right, so that's one way to finish off your weaving. That's one way to attach it to your dowel. So the second way is you're actually going to finish everything off like we just did. We cut everything and tied everything and we wove it into the back. So you're gonna do that first before you attach the dowel. Okay, so now for this way, you are going to thread your darning needle, nice long piece, line up the dowel to your end, and you're just going to start looping it through. So I'm going to go here, pull it almost to the end, lay my dowel on top, and I'm going to go over my dowel, back underneath, and I'm just going to start making like a loop stitch around this dowel here. So this is the other way to finish off your weaving. Looping it over, up and under, essentially like that. The entire way across, tie it off and weave in those ends. So this is just my short little cutie weaving just to show you all of the different stitches that you're able to use. But now you get to turn this into something amazing using all of those stitches. So again, this is the Sumac stitch. We have Tabby all through here. And again, I only did portions of it, not the whole way through. Here we have, this is our Sumac as well. We have looped Tabby in here, and I finished it off with our Raya knot at the end. So you get to be completely creative with what you come up with. Thank you so much for following along our weaving tutorial. I hope you had fun and really enjoyed it and learned a lot about the different stitches. So I can't wait to see how they turn out. So what is really cool about it is you can use your loom as many times as you want, and you can create little weavings and tapestries to your heart's content. So I can't wait to see how they turn out. So please tag us on Instagram at Pinnovate. We would love to see them. And if you have a chance, follow us. We are on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Pinterest. We're on all the things. So thanks again for following along, and I can't wait to see how they turned out. Bye for now.